Thank you for proving that, yes, it is possible to drive when it's raining. I know it's a bit of a thing. I don't know why it becomes such an issue in these parts. That's one thing I've never gotten completely used to, the fact that it rains and people don't know what to do with themselves. So here we are. We're at the end. 13. We're in the bonus round here, bonus lesson, and it's all about waiting. Fun stuff. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for bringing us all safely here. And we ask especially that your Spirit may be upon us during this discussion time. In Jesus' name, amen. So, waiting. Waiting is something that we are not good at. And we like to say, oh, it's a modern phenomenon, everything, technology. But if you think about it, it's always been the case. I mean, you could even say that a part of Adam and Eve's problem, because they got impatient. Eve especially. So, it was interesting. I was listening to an interview, or the author, the primary contributor to our study this quarter, and they asked her, why end on this one? Why not end like the last one was a good one? I mean, you say, worship that never ends, and then all of a sudden we're going for stuff that never ends into this nice, happy kind of a thing, but then we're ending with this one, with waiting. And it was like I don't remember exactly what she said, but it's basically, this is a sort of the reality of our situation, is that we hear all these things. We've, especially those who have grown up in the church, and if you just grow up just sort of, in a Christian mindset, not necessarily an Adventist mindset, but they're always often in a lot of Christian mindset. It's this thing about, they talk a lot about the end of time and stuff that's going to happen in the future, and is it going to happen, when it's going to happen, all these types of things. So here we are. We've been, they keep telling us it's going to happen soon. When is it going to be? Soon. When are we going to get there? How much farther are we out? Well, soon. It's soon. It's coming. But it's not even just about that, I think. I think it's more not just sort of the eschatological, if you want to use that word, waiting. A lot of times it's just like the everyday waiting. Like, stuff doesn't happen when we want it to happen. And we just need to wait sometimes. I like what she wrote in this introduction here for this week. Excuse me. It says, waiting on the Lord is not an idle and desperate biding of one's time. Instead, waiting on the Lord is an act full of trust and faith, a trust and faith revealed in action. So what does it mean to actively wait? It sounds almost like an oxymoron, like we talked about a couple weeks ago. What does it mean to be waiting but not being idle? What does that mean to you?
I think there's a sense of, it depends what you're waiting on. If you're waiting for something, and there's requires preparation,
Mm-hmm.
then there's something to do. But if you're waiting for something that's kind of like, I don't know, it's whatever. It's more so lollygagging, and you know, yeah, that's it.
The Christian church has been waiting for hundreds and hundreds of years for the second coming of Christ. But I think of something that was said to us, that we are to occupy until he comes.
Mm.
In other words, even though we are in the process of waiting, we can't just sit down in our ivory palaces or our homes or even our church and just do nothing, just to wait. But to occupy and continue on in the Lord's work, doing what we can to share the gospel as we wait.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of waiting in the Psalms. There's a lot of things about, as we've, covered at a reasonable length, there's a lot of emotions in the Psalms. The Psalms is a very emotional book. And there's a lot of times, as we have covered, where stuff isn't happening as quickly as the writer of the psalm would want it to happen, but they're like, okay, fine. It was interesting in just not specifically studying for this lesson, but it just came up as I was interesting. A few days ago, I was going through just like a regular Bible reading, and I was going through Eugene Peterson's The Message. It's an interesting read. And he put things in an interesting way here. Psalm 37, verse 34, he puts it a bit differently than what I had thought of before, and you'll see how it fits. The way he puts verse 34 is this. He says, wait passionately for God. So that's an interest. I've never heard that before. Because when we think about passion, we think about things that are doing. We're passionate about something, there's been times when people have, you get accused of like, where's your passion? Why aren't you doing anything? You're like, well, here we have Peterson is saying, you can wait passionately. You can be full of passion and still be waiting. And I think that's especially appropriate as we are in what is commonly referred to as Passion Week. We are nearing the end of that now. And there's this sort of, dichotomy, dissonance, I guess is the best word, where we are we don't know really what to do with ourselves. Because I think a lot of times we feel like we have to do something. We don't like not doing something. And it's kind of like, I wish I could say it was just, there comes a situation where it's like, we want to feel like we're contributing. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but sometimes we feel like we can contribute to the plan of salvation in the sense of like, this is the thing, and I'm speaking from my own experience here. There's a lot of things growing up. I grew up in a how do I say, segment of Adventism in which it was very this is going to sound bad, very like works oriented. I mean, they would never actually say that because we all know we're not supposed to say that, but it was kind of very much like this sort of thing. And so it's like drilled into my young mind about how that the Jesus is coming, and we can make Jesus come faster if we're just going out and spreading the gospel. Are we really? Is God waiting for us?
Well, it's a cooperation. In
Okay.
Matthew 28:19 and 20, he makes it very plain that the commission is to take the gospel to the whole
Yes.
world, and that's a part of the work of his followers to share the gospel to the world. And when that happens, he will come. So it's a working together sort of situation.
Okay.
Even while we wait, and that's what it says. Occupy till I come.
Yes, thank you. And so it's like, we have to, and I think that's a good way to put it, that we're in this sort of relationship, cooperative relationship with God, in that, and we have to be, we're not like, it's just like we have to be careful not to go too far either way. I mean, there's always going to be this tension. The Christian life is full of tension, between these two sort of, and in many cases where we're like, okay, we're not forcing God's hand, but at the same time, we're not passively just sitting there doing nothing. And I think sometimes we can get too far either way. And, yeah.
I know when, I've only been, it's a long time now. I've been an Adventist 20 years, but I didn't grow up an Adventist. So, but one thing that always sort of bothered me a little bit when I was first in the church was all these prayers for Jesus, please come now. And I'm thinking, I don't know that you praying that is going to really make it happen. I mean, there's a lot of other things involved in that. And maybe praying it is okay. I mean, I don't think there's really anything wrong with it, but just praying about it isn't going to do anything, I don't know. That was sort of my feeling. And
No,
I still have a little bit of a strange feeling about that. I think you need to,
No, I understand what you're saying. I mean, it is kind of this thing where it becomes, we often sort of, for lack of a better term, look down upon those or who have these very liturgical sort of prayers and things, or everything's just read out of a book, and they're just saying the words, but it doesn't mean anything, or they're just saying the words. But sometimes we can fall into that trap too. Like, yes, it's good that we should be saying those things, but if we think that just saying them is going to do anything about it, it doesn't. And God only God knows the hearts of who are we really meaning that. And so we really have to look at ourselves and say, is this something that we are? Am I just saying this, or or is this something that I am actively doing something about? And it's really kind of the thing. Maybe it's because I'm sorry, I'm just sort of speaking off the cuff here. Whenever there is a phenomenon, as we're all familiar with, that if we're just sitting there watching the clock, right, the time will go slower. Even though the time is there's still 60 seconds in a minute, still 60 minutes in an hour. But for some reason, there's something about it when we're sitting there watching the clock, as I'm sure we've all had that experience, sitting there in class, and we just waiting for the bell to ring because we're just done, but it doesn't work, but yet, if we are not paying attention to the time, and we're doing other things just our perception of time has changed. And I think there's and that's sort of where we have this sort of thing, this, like you said, like Marshall was saying, this occupying until we come. I think there's a lot of times, maybe we would have less of those prayers, like Becky was mentioning about, maybe if we're just spending our energy doing stuff for God, then it wouldn't be we'd be so busy doing the things that God wants us to do, that we won't be so anxious about the time and all these things. there's a lot of Bible text in this passage. Since this lesson is more of a topical sort of thing, as opposed to, there's a lot of passages in here. So I'm trying to I don't want to go through all of them, but you can see that there's a lot of waiting in the Bible. A lot of times God is telling us to wait. Here's just a few passages. It's really quick. A lot of this, there's a lot of the Psalms, and even in the Newer Testament, where there's a lot of waiting involved. I'll just throw out a few phrases in here that it says, obviously the wait for the Lord, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. But those who wait for the Lord, they will inherit the land. Wait for the Lord and keep his way. And now, Lord, what do I do? For what do I wait? My hope is in you. I waited patiently for the Lord. May those who wait for you not be ashamed through me. For through the Spirit, this is the New Testament now, for through the Spirit by faith we are waiting for the hope of righteousness. And, in Romans it talks about, for the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. And so these are just some examples of of just the many passages in the Bible where it's waiting. So it's not something that is just waiting like we think we have the monopoly on waiting because we are Adventists. We're waiting for the second Advent. There's a lot of waiting for the first Advent. I mean, you think about it. There's a lot more waiting for that than we have experienced. I mean, if you think about it, technically they were waiting since the Garden of Eden, right? And we don't know exactly when that was, but it was a long time ago. And it was a long time between the time of Garden of Eden to the time of Jesus coming to earth as a baby in the New Testament sort of thing. And all that time they were waiting. There was a lot of waiting. I remember reading somewhere, it might have been Patriarchs and Prophets or something like that, where God told Eve, right? He gave that promise, that somewhat cryptic promise about, the crushing the head and bruising the heel and all this sort of thing, right? And she knew that the promise was coming. She expected, and the thing is, when her firstborn son was born, she thought that was going to be the Messiah. That was going to be it. This was going to be, and so we have this expectation that we want it to come, not because so much we're impatient, we're just so can't wait, but it's this kind of, this sort of anticipation more than simply impatience. We're waiting for something good to happen. We can't wait for it to happen. The author talks about the word perseverance. And she defines perseverance as this, and I think this is very appropriate. It says, perseverance is our supreme commitment of refusing to succumb to fear of disappointment that somehow God will not come through for us. And this is something that we, not just in a grand sense, but a very personal sense. There's a lot of stories in the Bible where a personal sense, like I mentioned about Adam and Eve, but also a lot of times in our own lives, we have, if we look back and we think we wanted something to happen. We wanted God to show up in our lives, and we were asking for it, and it wasn't happening. This sort of seeking after God when things aren't looking so well. Somebody want to read Psalm 63, verse 1. I think this is a very graphic, for lack of a better word, depiction of what it's like to really wait for God. Psalm 63, 1.
Psalm 63, 1. O God, you are my God. Early will I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh longs for you in a dry and thirsty land where there is no water.
And we can identify with that, can't we? If you've been living in this area for more than a few years, more than a year or so, we know what it's like to it's supposed to be raining and it's not raining and it hasn't rained and it's not, things are drying up and everything is falling apart. And that's sort of and this is sort of, I see this as kind of a goal of sorts, to where even if it's where you may not feel that way, you may not, it's something, I think that's something to aspire to where we can be so close to God that this is how we feel when God is not near to us. Sometimes we can be a bit dismissive or whatever, but I think this is something, and we may read that, and it's this thing, we may read that and think, wow, I'm just not there. That's just not me. I don't feel like this deep longing. But it's something that we can get there. We can get there. Something to aspire to. Wow, there's so many things in here. And we can. I would be remiss if I did not sort of try and tie this into the times in which we are in, not just sort of grand times, but the entire Christian world is thinking about this sort of Jesus and his Passion Week and all these things. And you see that where there's a lot of times where, you think about the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus experienced there. And there was this real, even leading up to it, he knew what's going to happen. It was just sort of this waiting for it to happen. And there was parts of him that didn't want to happen. Or, but it's this sort of thing that we need to have that same kind of longing for God. Jesus was longing for his disciples to be with him. He had a lot of those same emotions that we have. And I think sometimes we kind of forget about that. I remember, I'm old enough to remember that when the series, the Living Bible had that series on Matthew. And I remember when that came out, that was revolutionary. Because you had an emotional Jesus that had the full range of emotions, not just the somber kind of, I don't know, gothic Jesus or whatever you want to call it. And there was this, for me, it was revolutionary in a sense. And it was kind of, I remember people of the previous generation kind of they didn't like it. I don't know why. He smiles too much or whatever. And it's just okay. But I remember there was I'm tying this into this sort of the Passion Week kind of a thing, and I remember the way the actor portrayed Jesus at the Last Supper when it came time for Judas to leave. A lot of times we read the account and we just sort of okay, this is the thing, and then he just got up and left. And that was that. But it was just this, I'm actually getting a little bit emotional thinking about it, because there was this longing that Jesus had Jesus has, if you go back and find those videos, they're pretty much, you can do a search and find them. They're posted in many different places. Where he had that longing. He did not want Judas to go. He knew what Judas was going to do, and he didn't want him to do it. And you have him kind of this sort of almost holding on to him, hoping that something would change, and it didn't happen. And I bring that up not only just to tie it in Passion Week, so I feel we should talk about it, but this is the same sort of longing that we should have, this sort of to the last end, like this is something that we need to think that God is holding on to us as much as we think that we're holding on to God, that we got to hold on to God. God is holding on to us too. And so in these periods where we are longing, where the waiting is getting too much, we need to stop and think, like, he's waiting too. He's waiting with us. And he has those same emotions, that same frustration. You've seen that, you go back through, and this is the thing, like I was saying, like Jesus had a full range of emotions. He was a human being. And there was points where he got frustrated with things. And frustration is kind of, yes.
I just want to share from that point that you made, that we're not only the ones waiting, but he's waiting for us.
Mm-hmm.
We played a game called the Pilgrim's Progress in Souls West, and we went through the same allegory of what Christian went through.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal was to go to a specific house where God was. And God, her name was, I forgot her name, one of the students, she was waiting in the house for Christian or any of the teams to make it to the house. And it took 2 hours, I think, for one team, the first team, to actually make it through. And God, or one of the students, was like, you don't understand how long I've been waiting for you guys to come. And it made her really like contemplate, like, as much as we want to go to heaven, I think that God desires more than anything in this world for us to be there as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. And I think sometimes we need to take time to think about these things, to kind of experience them on our own account. It's just, and sometimes we can get frustrated with things when things aren't happening. Frustration is very much I think it's a form of anger that is wound up in waiting and not getting things happening in the timely manner. And Jesus got frustrated. The time to come, there's a time when he, had the Mount of Transfiguration, and he comes down with those 3 disciples, and he comes down, and the other disciples, they're having that whole issue with this guy. They can't cast the demon out. They can't heal this guy. And you see Jesus getting frustrated. Like, how much longer do I have to put up with this? Like, it's like, but it's not frustration in what we often would think. Like, it's just sort of like, this kind of thing. But it's really like, how long do I have to, when you know what the end result will be, right? How much better off that person will be once they get to that point, and they're just not getting there for whatever reasons. It's frustrating. And God can be that way with us sometimes. And so I'm just saying that. I use that as an example because sometimes we think it's not, like we feel guilty for being frustrated sometimes when we shouldn't. I mean, God gets frustrated too sometimes. And so we have to understand that we're not in this alone. Moving on, we're going to they talk about this thing about this sort of transitioning now to more of this peaceful rest, peaceful waiting. Psalm 131 talks about verse 2, 131, verse 2 of the New American Standard Version. It says, "Surely I've composed and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child rests against his mother, my soul is like a weaned child within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forever." You know, we, as much as we can have these moments. This is not something that is, oh, it's only for people who wrote the Bible or whoever. We can still have these moments where we are resting, we are waiting, and we're totally fine with it. Like a weaned child, they're not restless, they're just comforted. And God is waiting. God is, we're waiting with God in a sense. And so we can, I bring that up. Let's see. It says the weaned child is a powerful image of one who finds calmness and who is quieted in the embrace of God. It points to the loving relationship a child has with its mother at various stages in that child's young life. And it talks about we're weaned. The author brings out what are they being weaned from. In the illustration, you talk about being weaned from milk. Now we're on solid food, and it kind of changes the way the child views the mother. And this is the way too. They talk about weaning. It says weaning us from insubstantial ambitions and pride. God introduces us to the nourishment of solid food, which is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. So maybe this part of this restlessness that we're feeling, this frustration that we often feel, maybe that's just because we have stuff that we're still haven't been weaned yet from our insubstantial ambitions and pride. Something to think about next time we're getting frustrated. You have to talk to God and say, hey, why is this bothering me so much? Why is this waiting so bothering so much? I had this, this phrase came into mind I thought of one time. It's like, I can't make him patient, but I can make him wait. Because waiting in and of itself does not breed patience. Waiting is just waiting, and how we react to it, that's whether we're developing patience or we're just being a spoiled brat about things. Let's see. Just want to make sure I get everything covered. There's a lot. This is kind of the thing, in anybody who's ever done like the Sabbath school as a teacher, you really kind of like, do we feel this kind of pressure in a sense sometimes that we have to cover everything? Because it's all good stuff, right? But, I kind of, there's this, and we really should, if you all are not, obviously if you're here, it means you have some sort of dedication to the Sabbath school lesson. And so I really hope that you're doing this on your own time, because there's so much in here, so many like Bible promises, as especially in this passage, this lesson that we covered, where you can get something out of it, So it's like, how do you, it's like you have these videos, this is the way I described it. How do you have a game that is played that's 3-4 hours long, and you have to condense it into like 15 minutes, kind of a thing. And that's sort of what I'm feeling at sometimes. We just have to, like, what are the points that would be most beneficial? And so let's talk more about this insubstantial, what do you call it? These things that we need to get weaned from. And a big thing is pride. I mean, everything is about pride. I mean, if you want to think about it, we talk about the sin that the writers told about what is the sin that most easily trips us up? I can't remember exactly how it was worded. And I always thought it was like, oh, it meant to be like something personal for you, like your special sin that gets you the most or whatever. But then I was watching a sermon or listening to a sermon. It was I think it was Dwight Nelson or somebody. And he said, what is this sin that most easily besets us? And he says, well, let me demonstrate it for you. And he does like this. Taking a selfie of himself. It's ourselves. And this sin that so easily besets us is the same one for everybody. It's the sin of pride. And that, I think that's what kind of, it causes these things to make it worse, because who are we? Like, we feel like, oh, we shouldn't be waiting. You know, I'm special, I'm a whatever. You know, I shouldn't be made to wait. Do you know who I am? I shouldn't be wait. I mean, everything is about, like, it's a privilege. We feel so entitled to have everything right away. Whatever that right away means. And I'm not saying, oh, this is just a modern phenomenon because we have the technology and we can have the world information at our fingertips. I think all this modern technology has done is simply just condense the time. It hasn't created this impatience with us. It's always been impatient. We've always been impatient, whether it be one way or the other, how long that waiting should be. We need to, it says God's people live in a world that afflicts the faithful, the world of temptations and hardship for almost everyone. A refreshed conviction that he is a child of God and dependent on God for his life consoles the psalmist and brings him to confess that his pride has no value. The deceitfulness of pride that causes the proud to become self-centered and unable to look beyond themselves. The proud are thus blinded to the higher reality of God. And so these, and so I can't, as I see our time is going off, and I don't want to keep you waiting, for longer. I think we'd be remiss to not talk about hope. We talked a lot about this sort of negative, or I guess negative is a good word, aspect of waiting. We haven't talked much about the positive waiting, the hopefulness. Hopefulness is the opposite of anxiety. Anxiety is the waiting of something bad is going to happen, the anticipation that something bad is going to happen. I don't know what it is, but it's going to be bad, and you just kind of this. But we need to have this hope. And hope is not something that is just for us here as we're waiting for the second coming or whatever. Hope is something that's always been the case. Psalm 126, I won't read the whole psalm. It's not a long psalm, but just for the sake of time, I won't go through all of it. It talks about when they were finally restored from exile to the land that they had God given to them. And it says, it's this whole aspect of hopefulness that the restoration, just this whole thing, it's just this beautiful, there is this aspect of restoration, there is deliverance, and we can look back at the times. What is it? We have no fear for the future unless we forget how God has led us in the past. And so these psalms, like Psalm 126, we can go back and see, well, God delivered his people at this time. God can deliver me as well. It says, yet the past joy and relief are relived through songs and appropriated in present experience. The new generations keep biblical history alive by counting themselves as present among those who saw the events firsthand. And so this sort of tradition is passed on to another person from generation to generation. You say, God led us all the way back then when I was your age, and now God can lead you as well. And this is a sort of the thing, and it goes back and trying to tie this back into some of the things we talked at the beginning. This is sort of the thing, this sort of occupying till he comes. This is how we occupy our time, by sharing stories how God has helped us in the past, and how God has helped us to wait, has given us that peace, that joy, that comfort of the weaned child, so to speak. And it's something that we can share with other people, because we're all waiting for something. That's just life. Everybody's waiting for something. Do we have this longing that is sort of baked into ourselves? Yeah, and it was barely on Wednesday. We talked about the Sabbath. They talked about waiting, how the Sabbath is good for us, because it talks about waiting. It talks about we are resting in God, and how it points back to creation and how God led them, how God created the world, and how God can recreate in us the same sort of thing, this resting in God, that we're not striving, we're not doing this busy work to keep us occupied, that we need to learn to slow down. It says people can enjoy Sabbath rest because God is the Most High. His superior position on the high places gives him an unparalleled advantage over their enemies. The Lord's work of creation, and especially redemption of that creation, should inspire people to worship God and to love him. And there's so much, like this whole, just that one day at Wednesdays, Psalm 92 it's kind of, it's a medium length. It's not a short one, but it's all about thanking God, about who he is, how much better he is, how much higher he is than us, and how we can trust in him. It's and let's see.
I really like how you started off the lesson with that tension we have.
Yes.
One being doing our own works because we really want to hasten the coming of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other extreme was doing nothing and just, I guess, expecting him to do all the work, kind of like praying for him to come already. But I like what you're bringing up, because reflecting on who God is and looking back to what he's done, in a sense, really helps us take action in what to do right now, And I think of the children of Israel when Moses went up for 40 days in Sinai, and they were told to wait, just relax, wait. I'm gonna do something for you guys, and they got so impatient that they ended up making their own golden calf, because they kind of forgot who God was, and they thought he kind of doesn't care about us. He doesn't want the best for us, and pride took over, and they're like, we're gonna do it our way. We're gonna make this happen so that we can, I don't know. It's just so opposite of the weaned child,
Yes. Yeah, and it's like these times, and it's the times when we don't know. It's really the not knowing, I think, that gets to us the most. It's not knowing what is happening, what is on the other side. On Thursday, there's that whole, and this is sometimes, sometimes we should go back, even though the quarter's over, we can go back and look at some of these things. Thursday's lesson, I think, is one of those things that we should probably save it in some shape or form to look back, to refer to us, because it talks about this, the joy coming in the morning, and how we're in so much darkness. There's some times when we have so much darkness around us that we just want it to end. Like, we want it just it's like maybe we're praying for God to end, God to come quickly, simply for our own selfish reason. Like, we just don't want to wait anymore. Like, we're tired of this. And so we have to be careful about how we, our approach to things. The resurrection even ties in with the resurrection. I thought that was a great way to tie it in. Like, even all the promises that Jesus had given them about him rising again, it didn't click with them when it actually happened. But they still had to wait. And, you know, I can't stress enough how important it is to go back and look at these stories in the Bible and to think about all the times when other people had to wait for stuff and it wasn't happening and it was just so much, you know. I'm thinking about, as we are now as soccer friends or football friends, we are in added time now. I can't help but think, like we talked about, I mentioned earlier about the Matthew videos and how that kind of, when you look at it, there's a lot of these subtle things that the actor portrays that really is impactful. There is this scene after he's been resurrected, and the women are coming to him. And I can't really depict it. You would just have to go back and watch it. But just the way he greets them, it was just like, oh, good morning. I mean, it's just this very, like, matter of fact. I mean, he's obviously happy to see them, but it was just very matter of fact. It wasn't like, hey, look at me, I'm raised, look at this, you know. It was like, no, I told you. I mean, it's just like, I told you I was coming. I told you I was raised, you know. He didn't say any of that, but it was all very much implied. And in the way he approached them. And I think that's sort of so that we need to keep these little things in mind, because it's like God is, you know, everything is going to happen. And it's going to happen when the time is best, and we just need to wait it out sometimes. Wow, there's so much in here. The hope of resurrection that Jesus did, was raised from the dead, and all these sort of things should always give us hope that we can go through. How God was able to sustain Jesus through the worst part of his life, through the worst part of anybody's life that have ever experienced. If God was able to sustain Jesus through that he can sustain us with our issues as well. So, just on that note, let's wrap it up. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this hope that you have given to us. Help us to be able to hold on to that hope, to rest in that hope, to have the peace of the weaned child, and to not try and push things through on our own timing. We ask this now as we continue through these Sabbath hours into the worship period and throughout the rest of the day and the rest of our lives, that we may wait for you patiently. We thank you for all these things in Jesus' name.